Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. This episode of Anti-War News is sponsored by Devolution Machine, which is an anti-war combat veteran-owned and operated precision machine shop that operates with those values in mind. Devolution Machine offers CNC turning and milling along with manual surface and cylindrical grinding services to support any non-defense related customer. Devolution Machine can manufacture in quantities of 1 to 1 million in materials ranging from hardened tool steel to soft plastics. Devolution Machine's location in central Pennsylvania has not limited its ability to serve customers from their city of Williamsport to California to Florida. If you or someone you know is looking for manufacturing services in the United States from a values-based company, please reach out to Andrew at info@devolution-machine.com. And that is spelled Devolution. You could find that email in the description. Or look for them on their Instagram at Devolution Machine to keep an eye out for coming expansions and products. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Trump breaks the record for U.S. airstrikes in Somalia. So the Trump administration has shattered the record for total U.S. airstrikes in Somalia in a single calendar year, as the U.S. has been bombing the country at a record pace with virtually no media coverage. U.S. Africa Command told antiwar.com in an email on Tuesday that its forces launched a total of 9 airstrikes in a recent 2-week campaign against the ISIS affiliate in Somalia's northeastern Puntland region, bringing the total number of U.S. airstrikes in Somalia this year to 68. So as I said, I covered this yesterday, this 2-week campaign that AFRICOM said they launched multiple airstrikes, and they told me that they launched 9. So they have blown away the record of 63, which Trump set back in 2019. That was the previous record for U.S. airstrikes in Somalia in a single year. 63 for the entire year. So now we're at 68 at the end of August. So we still have, 4 months left for the U.S. to continue bombing. And based on what I'm seeing in Somali media, based on what we're seeing the U.S. allied forces saying, on their social media accounts, it seems like there's ongoing battles, and this is just going to continue. And when it comes to the U.S. war in Somalia, it's actually 2 different wars that the U.S. is engaged in. This 2-week fight was against the ISIS affiliate in the northeastern Puntland region, as I mentioned, which is an offshoot of Al-Shabaab. So it's a failure of U.S. intervention in the country. Now there's 2 groups that they're bombing, as opposed to just Al-Shabaab, which Al-Shabaab was actually created out of a U.S.-backed Ethiopian invasion that ousted the Islamic Courts Union from power in Mogadishu, which was a coalition of Islamic groups that very briefly held power in Mogadishu. So Ethiopia took them out with support from the U.S., and then Al-Shabaab was the radical offshoot of the Islamic Courts Union and their first recorded attack was against Ethiopian troops occupying Mogadishu. So that's how they got their start. And now, almost 20 years later, Ethiopia invaded in 2006. So almost 20 years later, the U.S. is bombing another group. And so, you got that fight in Puntland, and then the U.S. is also backing the Mogadishu-based government against Al-Shabaab in the south, which is a very weak government, really propping them up. It's very similar to kind of the war against the Taliban in Afghanistan, where the U.S. was propping up this weak government that just folded as soon as the U.S. left. Many suspect that a similar thing would happen if the U.S. pulled support from this government in Mogadishu. So this story, I didn't really get into that. I kind of just went on a tangent there. But if people are interested in kind of the background, if you go to antiwar.com and you search Scott Horton, Somalia, the first thing that comes up is a chapter from his book, Enough Already, about the background in U.S. intervention in Somalia. Anyway, where was I here? So 68 airstrikes, and this is the result of Trump easing restrictions on airstrikes and special operation raids in areas outside of countries officially considered combat zones by the U.S., and that is any country outside of Iraq and Syria. So the result was a massive increase in U.S. airstrikes, including the bombing campaign in Yemen, where from March 15th to May 6th, the U.S. launched a brutal campaign and killed more than 250 civilians. And according to figures from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, Trump launched nearly as many airstrikes during his first 5 months in office as President Biden did during his entire 4-year term. And Trump also became the first president to bomb Iran with his strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities during the 12-day U.S.-Israeli war against the Islamic Republic. And the Trump administration has also conducted airstrikes against ISIS and al-Qaeda fighters in Iraq and Syria, while at the same time supporting the new Syrian government, which is led by a former al-Qaeda commander. And as far as I know, the U.S. has not launched airstrikes in other countries outside of, again, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Iran under this current Trump administration, as far as I know. All right, so the next one here, the IDF kills 75 Palestinians in Gaza over 24 hours. And just a warning, there's a rough picture in this story. So Gaza's health ministry said in a statement on Tuesday that Israeli forces killed 75 Palestinians and wounded 370 over the previous 24-hour period, as relentless U.S.-backed Israeli attacks continued across the Strip. On top of the violent deaths, the health ministry also recorded 3 more starvation-related deaths due to the Israeli siege. So people are still continued to starve to death every day. And Israeli strikes on Tuesday included the bombing of a tent in southern Gaza near the city of Khan Yunis that killed 6 members of the same family, including 3 children. And you could see this picture here are of the 3 children who were killed in this airstrike. 3 siblings, very young children. Looks like they're all under the age of 10. Just another massacre of kids. And the IDF has continued its heavy attack on Gaza City as it prepares to take over the city, plans that involve the cleansing of its Palestinian population, and then they plan to completely destroy Gaza City. And Gaza City residents told Reuters that Israeli tank and aerial attacks pounded the city's eastern neighborhoods throughout the night. And health officials told Reuters that at least 18 people were killed in and around Gaza City overnight. This was Monday night into Tuesday morning. So last week, the UN-backed IPC confirmed that famine is occurring in the Gaza governorate, which includes Gaza City and the nearby towns. And they're saying, they need a total ceasefire, full ceasefire to address this humanitarian catastrophe to make sure it doesn't get worse. But instead, Israel's planning an escalation with the blessing of President Trump. The aid massacres continued on Tuesday. The health ministry said that it recorded the killing of 17 more aid seekers in Gaza. All right, the next one here. Christian priests and nuns refuse to leave Gaza City. So Christian priests and nuns based in Gaza City will remain to help displaced people sheltering at 2 churches despite the Israeli military's plans to conquer the city. And the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem and the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem said this on Tuesday in a joint statement that they issued. So this is the joint statement. Quote, at the time of this statement, evacuation orders were already in place for several neighborhoods in Gaza City. Reports of heavy bombardment continue to be received. There is more destruction and death in a situation that was already dramatic before this operation. It seems that the Israeli government's announcement that the gates of hell will open is indeed taking on tragic forms, end quote. So hundreds of civilians have been sheltering at the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza City and the nearby St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church. Both churches have come under Israeli attack, including the recent IDF tank shelling of the Holy Family Church, which killed 3 Christians and injured Father Gabriel Romanelli, who is a Catholic priest from Argentina. He's the parish priest at Holy Family. This is a picture of him from Tuesday. The church posts pictures of their liturgy, of their daily mass, of their prayers every single day, and a lot of videos that they post lately. I mean, this has been going on for weeks now. You hear explosions. Sometimes the door blows open because of the bombings nearby the church. and they're living out their Christian faith in a very public way in this, under these horrific circumstances. It's really, an admirable thing that these this tiny Christian community is doing in Gaza. And Nuns with the Missionaries of Charity, which is a congregation founded by Mother Teresa, they've had a presence in Gaza since the 1970s, and they've taken care of disabled Palestinians at the church. They have a facility there well before, October 7th. And so they're going to stay. They're not going to leave those people to die. And then the other point that the patriarchates make is that if these disabled people or many of the sick and malnourished civilians who are sheltering at the churches, if they try to make this trek south, it's a death sentence for them. So the patriarchate said, quote, like other residents of Gaza City, the refugees living in the facilities will have to decide according to their conscience what they will do. Among those who have sought shelter within the walls of the compounds, many are weakened and malnourished due to the hardships of the last months. Leaving Gaza City and trying to flee to the south would be nothing less than a death sentence. For this reason, the clergy and nuns have decided to remain and continue to care for all those who will be in the compounds. End quote. So Israel's plans for the takeover of Gaza City involve the forced displacement of more than 1 million Palestinians sheltering there. As I've really kind of hammered this point, we know what they're planning for Gaza City. And then from there, the Israeli government wants to pressure them to leave Gaza altogether, as we know the ultimate goal is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian territory. According to numbers from the UN, at least 11,600 Palestinians have been displaced from North Gaza to southern Gaza just this month since Israel ramped up the attacks on Gaza City. So they're saying about nearly 12,000 have actually moved from North Gaza. And when they talk about moving to South Gaza, that means going south of the Netzarim corridor, which is this strip of land completely controlled by the IDF. So once they go south of that, they're not going to be able to go back north. So nearly 12,000, which, that's a lot of people, but that's nothing compared to what Israel wants. They estimate there's 1 million people in Gaza City, and they want them all to go south. So the patriarchates said, quote, "This is not the right way. There is no reason to justify the deliberate and forcible mass displacement of civilians. It is time to end this spiral of violence, to put an end to war, and to prioritize the common good of the people. There has been enough devastation in the territories and in people's lives. There is no reason to justify keeping civilians as prisoners and hostages in dramatic conditions. It is now time for the healing of the long-suffering families on all sides," end quote. So very brave of the Christians, the priests and the nuns to stay there and to take care of the people they've been helping. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. refers to Israel on double tap hospital strike. So the U.S. State Department has refused to comment on the Israeli double tap strike on the Nasser hospital in Gaza, which slaughtered 20 Palestinians, including 5 journalists. A State Department spokesperson told the Times of Israel when asked to comment on the strike, and this is Israeli media, they said, quote, "We refer you to the government of Israel," end quote. So the statement comes after a State Department employee, Shahed Gawarshi, was fired for trying to release Israel-related statements that leadership did not like. So I covered this, maybe it was just last week that he was fired. But one of the reasons why he clashed with leadership, he suggested releasing a statement after the IDF assassinated Anas al-Sharif, the Al Jazeera journalist. He wanted to put out a statement expressing condolences for the killing of journalists, for the journalists killed, and basically saying, we don't like journalists being killed, but they didn't want to put that out. So he was fired, and now this is what the State Department is reduced to, just not even saying. I mean, this is worse than Netanyahu. I mean, we know Netanyahu's lying when, what did he call it, a tragic mishap? I mean, there's a lot of evidence. I mean, there's just no reason to believe anything Netanyahu says. But at least he knew he should probably say, whoops. And the State Department doesn't even bother to say, oh, this is tragic. It's bad that a hospital was bombed and journalists were killed and rescue workers were killed. No, they just say, we refer you to Israel. They might as well just do that for everything. So President Trump's State Department has repeatedly referred to Israel when asked about its actions, which are supported by a constant flow of U.S. military aid. That's the thing here, is that the U.S. likely provided Israel with these munitions that struck this hospital. According to the Israeli military, they said that both of these strikes, the initial strike and the double tap strike, was launched from a tank. And since the start of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, the U.S. has provided Israel with tens of thousands of shells for its Merkava tanks. So obviously the U.S. has significant responsibility here, because the military aid goes beyond just providing, the bombs and munitions. So the double tap strike was caught on video, of course, which we have seen. And the Israeli military is claiming that the attack targeted a Hamas camera. That's, again, they put out that was their official statement about it on Tuesday. Obviously, they had no evidence there. And the initial strike killed a Reuters cameraman, Hussam al-Masri, and we've used his photos for our stories before. The initial strike killed him, and he was filming operating a live feed for Reuters. So that's the camera. They claim it's a Hamas camera. It's just this whole cover story is just completely crazy. All right, so the next one here, Israeli journalists hail killing of Palestinian colleagues in Gaza. So this article is from Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, and it's about some of the response on Israeli TV to this murder of those 5 journalists and the 15 other people who were killed in the double tap strike on the hospital. So I-24 News Arab Affairs analyst Zivi Yehaz Kelly. I butchered his name, but that's okay. I don't mind disrespecting this guy. He claimed on the evening news broadcast that the slain journalists were, quote, Hamas Nukba terrorists in every sense, end quote. And precisely because of their professional work documenting Gaza. He said, quote, it may be the message in striking the so-called journalists is the realization in Israel of how much damage was done by those who broadcast the images of hunger and Hamas's one-sided narrative, continuing the legacy of Yahya Sinwar in the guise of journalism. End quote. So just think about what he just said there. What is he specifically talking about? How much damage was done by those who broadcast the images of hunger? And as I covered yesterday, at least 2 of the journalists, one of the photos that we used of his was of a malnourished baby, severely malnourished. And one of the journalists who worked for AP who was killed, she had a story documenting the horrific malnutrition of children. And this guy's saying, good, they're covering the starvation. So it's good that they were killed. So he went on, quote, just consider how much cognitive damage those terrorist journalists, or as one could call them, Nukba journalists, inflicted on Israel. Palestinian reporters shaped the situation on the ground and the perception of reality, which partly enabled the war and later lent Hamas legitimacy. If Israel has decided to eliminate the journalists, better late than never. The spearhead of Hamas's military arm is those Nukba journalists. So in my view, Israel did well to kill them, though too late, end quote. And this isn't something like there's no getting around what he's saying here. It's just monstrous. And there was they mentioned some of the journalists who were killed, including Hussam al-Masri, who I mentioned, and Mariam Daga. I want to mention her name again. This is a photo of her. She was the AP one reporter who documented the malnutrition. And again, he's saying because of that, she deserved to be killed. She should be targeted and killed. And I'm sure that is the thinking within the Israeli government, but they don't want to say it publicly like this. But this is where you hear a lot of this stuff from these Israeli pundits. So then there's some other justification here from other mainstream Israeli journalists, including Shirat Avatan Cohen, the political correspondent for Israel Hayom, which is the Miriam Adelson-owned paper. And Miriam Adelson was a major donor to Trump. So was her late husband. So Cohen said, quote, let me be clear. It's good that the IDF does whatever is necessary not to endanger our forces in the field. Keep it up, end quote. She also posted that she does not consider those killed to be journalists. So again, just monstrous stuff here. Very evil from these Israeli journalists. The next one here, poll says the majority of Israelis believe that there are no innocents in Gaza. This article is from Middle East Eye. So a poll conducted by an Israeli organization has revealed that the vast majority of Israeli Jews believe there are no innocents in the Gaza Strip. ACORD, a research group linked to Hebrew University specializing in social psychology, said that 76% of the Jewish public partially or fully agree that there are no innocents in Gaza. The survey found that even among Israeli opposition voters, 47% fully supported the claim, while among Jewish opposition voters, a majority also agrees with the claim. So, I mean, this is something, and we've seen there was another similar poll that I think it was 82% of Israeli Jews said that they agreed there were no innocents in Gaza. So this has been a consistent finding from polls here. All right, so the next one here, Israel to remain in newly occupied areas of Syria. So Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Tuesday that Israel will remain in the territory it has captured in southern Syria following the regime change that ousted former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in December 2024. He said, quote, the IDF will remain at the peak of Mount Hermon and in the security zone necessary to protect the Golan and Galilee settlements from threats looming from the Syrian side as the main lesson for the events of October 7th, end quote. So while he is citing alleged threats from Syria to justify the continued occupation, Israel has reported just one rocket attack against its territory, against the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights from Syrian territory since the regime change. One rocket was fired from Syria, and it landed in an open area, no damage, no casualties. So he's saying for all these security reasons, we have to continue this occupation. And the new Syrian government, led by former al-Qaeda leader Ahmed al-Shara, has also been very deferential toward Israel, even while facing significant Israeli airstrikes and an Israeli invasion of southwestern Syria. And Israel has also used the plight of the Syrian Druze minority to justify the occupation. They certainly are facing, real persecution. There was massacres by government forces of Druze civilians in Soweto recently, of course. But this is a government that Israel helped put in power. So that it rings hollow. Their concern, like we're supposed to believe this Israeli government, there's some kind of humanitarians who want to help the Druze. So, but that's something Katz mentioned as well. So this comes after the Syrian government condemned an Israeli ground incursion in the area of Beit Jin, which is a village in southern Syria near the Lebanon border. And despite these tensions, there's been these talks between Israel and Syria. The U.S. is pushing for some kind of security deal, which seems unlikely to happen at least anytime soon here. All right, so the next one here, U.S. envoy Barrack berates Lebanese reporters. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So U.S. envoy Tom Barrack, so he's the U.S. ambassador to Turkey. He's also a special envoy to Syria, and he's been involved in the Lebanon negotiations. He's been just all over the place with the things he says. He's kind of a clown. And then he goes to Lebanon today, and he lashes out at the reporters. So what happened here, he's going up to the podium, and he says, a lot of people are asking questions, and he says, whoa, wait a minute here. This isn't, we're going to stop. You guys need to behave civilized, and we're going to end this if it becomes animalistic. So he's suggesting that they're animalistic. And then he said something like, this is the problem with the entire region, like what you guys are doing. So, I mean, just incredibly disrespectful of Barrack here. And for some reason, this guy's serving as like an envoy to 3 different countries. And when he's just not a diplomat at all, and he doesn't know what he's talking about half the time. I mean, he's just all over the map. And he said, recently, the era of Western intervention in the Middle East is over. And then he goes to Lebanon and talks to them like this. But he was there, they're talking about this plan for the disarmament of Hezbollah, and this they want to establish this Trump economic zone in southern Lebanon, which the Lebanese president said he didn't even hear of until he saw it in the media. So this whole plan doesn't really seem like it's going to come together. But also the Lebanese press syndicate issued a statement calling for the State Department to apologize for the inappropriate treatment of the reporters. The Lebanese Office of the Presidency also expressed regret for Barrack's actions and thanked the reporters for their hard work. All right, so the next one here, Iran holds talks with European countries threatening sanctions. So on Tuesday, Iranian officials met with representatives from the UK, France, and Germany in Geneva as the European countries are threatening to reimpose snapback sanctions on the Islamic Republic over the lack of diplomatic progress in the wake of the 12-day U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. So an unnamed diplomat told the Associated Press that the meeting ended without a final outcome, signaling that no progress was made. This means these sanctions could be coming soon. The UK, Germany, and France, what they call the E3 countries, have threatened to take action, to trigger these sanctions by the end of August if there's no progress made, and that's right around the corner. And so these snapback sanctions are UN Security Council sanctions that were lifted on Iran when the 2015 nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, was signed. And there's a mechanism where a signatory to that deal can trigger the sanctions. And the European countries are going to say they're going to do it. Iran says they don't have the right to because the U.S. was the party that violated that deal by pulling out of it and reimposing sanctions in 2018. And they're saying there's going to be consequences. Some Iranian officials have said this could lead to Iran pulling out of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And I do think that if that happens, that could be the pretext for another Israeli-U.S. war on Iran, even though, the absurdity of it is that Israel isn't even a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They unlike Iran, they do have a secret nuclear weapons program and a secret nuclear stockpile. But anyway, I think if these sanctions go in place, it's going to be another sign. The European countries played their role in the lead up to that war with the resolution at the IAEA Board of Governors and everything. So I think if we see the sanctions go on, it's a sign that another war could be coming, and it could be coming soon. All right, so the next one here, report says the U.S. begins troop withdrawal from major Iraq bases. This article is from The Cradle. It's based on reports in Iraqi Kurdish media that say that the U.S. has begun withdrawing from 2 major military bases in Iraq, accelerating a previously negotiated timeline for the drawdown of international coalition troops. According to a high-level source in the Iraqi government speaking with Kurdistan 24, the withdrawal began Sunday morning following an order issued by the U.S. Embassy. The source stated that the Ain al-Assad base in Anbar and the Victory base at Baghdad International Airport are expected to be completely evacuated within the next few days. The source added that some 2,000 troops have been stationed at Ain al-Assad, a key hub for U.S. operations in the country. An Iraqi security source speaking with Shafaq News has provided a longer timeline for the withdrawal from Ain al-Assad, stating last week that the last U.S. soldier would leave the base by the 15th of September, after which the international coalition headquarters there would be permanently closed. Washington, so the plan here is that they're going to move at least some of these troops to Kurdistan, to Erbil in northern Iraq. So it's not a full withdrawal from Iraq, but I was expecting them. We'll see if this is confirmed. I'm always skeptical of stories about the U.S. pulling out of Iraq because they played so many shell games with withdrawals here. I'm surprised if they completely evacuate the Ain al-Assad base and the base at the Baghdad airport. I figured they were going to leave some troops, a few hundred troops in those bases. But if they're actually pulling out of them, that would be surprising. I saw somebody, I forget who, on Twitter or something say, this could be a sign of that war with Iran is coming, that they're kind of pulling out of these bases in Iraq that are pretty vulnerable to an Iranian missile attack. So maybe it's potentially related to that. All right, so the next one here, Trump administration mulls stakes in major arms firms. So the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said on Tuesday that the Trump administration is considering taking stakes in major U.S. weapons firms, comments that came after the U.S. government announced that it was acquiring a 10% stake in Intel, the U.S. chip-making giant. So this is Lutnick. He said he was asked in a CNBC interview if the administration was considering taking pieces of U.S. defense firms such as Boeing, Palantir, or Lockheed Martin. And Lutnick said, quote, there's a monstrous discussion about defense. Lockheed Martin makes 97% of their revenue from the U.S. government. They are basically an arm of the U.S. government. They make exquisite munitions, amazing things that can knock a missile out of the air when it's coming toward you, end quote. Lutnick said that Pentagon officials were discussing the idea. He said, quote, "What's the economics of that? I'm going to leave that to my Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Secretary of Defense. These guys are on it and are thinking about it," end quote. So major U.S. weapons firms obviously already have a huge influence over U.S. policy. And I mean, what he's saying there is true, that they are essentially an arm of the U.S. government. They work hand in glove with the U.S. government. They fund all the think tanks that produce all the papers to justify war. They fund the think tanks that employ generals when they retire, and then many of them, go back and forth from the Pentagon to the think tanks, or the generals also go on their boards, work directly for the weapons makers, and then sometimes return to the government. And in some cases, like Lloyd Austin, who was on the board of Raytheon, run the Pentagon. I don't know if corruption can be more blatant than that. So it's obviously a very corrupt system already. And the idea of the U.S. government actually taking an actual piece of the some of these companies would just incentivize more war, more military spending. So obviously no good. But what he is saying is right, that it is essentially an arm of the U.S. government. It's a huge problem, this corruption, and this would just make it worse. All right, so the next one here, Trump order on flag burning defies Supreme Court ruling. So this one's from Kyle Anselin at the Libertarian Institute. So he covered the Trump order on the flag burning. So President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Monday ordering the Justice Department to prosecute people who set fire to the American flag. The order contradicts a 1989 Supreme Court ruling that determined flag burning is protected by the First Amendment. The executive order says, quote, "My administration will act to restore respect and sanctity to the American flag and prosecute those who incite violence or otherwise violate our laws while desecrating this symbol of our country to the fullest extent permissible under any available authority," end quote. In Texas versus Johnson, the Supreme Court ruled that burning the American flag is an act of political speech protected by the First Amendment. Former conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia voted in favor of the decision. He explained, quote, "We have a First Amendment which says that the right of free speech shall not be abridged, and it is addressed in particular to speech critical of the government. I mean, that was the main kind of speech that tyrants would seek to suppress," end quote. So Trump is, his argument is that flag burning, it does not apply as it amounts to incitement. So, again, he's just totally going against this ruling. Glenn Greenwald had a good clip about it on his show, explaining it more in depth of why it is a violation of the Constitution and of this Supreme Court ruling. The last story here, the U.S. sends more warships near Venezuela. Another one from Kyle here. So the U.S. has deployed 2 additional warships to the South Caribbean Sea in the waters near Venezuela. The Trump administration says the move is part of its effort to target cartels. Venezuela has responded by mobilizing millions of troops, members of this militia that they have, and deploying some near the border with U.S. ally Colombia. And they say that they're cracking down on drug traffickers by deploying these troops to Colombia. The allegation is that Maduro is the cartel leader of Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, which doesn't actually exist as an organization. It's just a term that they use for like Venezuela's military and government officials who they allege are involved in this network of drug trafficking. And as Kyle mentioned in this and another thing he wrote recently, there's like a U.S.-funded government think tank that they say, that there's corrupt officials, lower level, mid-level officials who are involved in this, and that it's kind of tolerated by the government, but it's not actually the central government, Maduro, that's overseeing, this like drug trafficking. So the whole thing is really bogus and does seem to be a pretext for an attempt at regime change. And we see these warships going there, which is certainly concerning. I think if they sent an aircraft carrier, I would get much more concerned that they might actually take some action here. All right, so the next one, that's it. Actually, that's the last story. So please go check out our viewpoints. One from Kelly Vlahos, Nord Stream explosions linked to Ukraine military, but no one cares. One from Blair Graham, when the Russia experts get it wrong. One from Jonathan Cook, how Western media helped turn Israel's genocide into fake news. One from Jose Nino, bootstraps or bailouts, the hidden truth of Israel's military power. And I just did an interview with Jose Nino that was published on Tuesday with Headline USA, the news site that he works for, and he's doing a podcast for them. I think it's called Headline Geopolitics, so go check that out. Our spotlight is from Shang Mukamer. There is something worse than starvation in Gaza. So please go check all that out. Check out our blog. Go to the lower part of the page. Lots of stuff from all around the world that's happening, stuff that I wish I could cover more in depth, especially the conflicts in Africa, but it's all there for you at antiwar.com if you want to check it out. Is that it? That is it. So you could always support this show by liking, subscribing, commenting. I appreciate everyone who does. Follow us on social media. I think that's all I have to say for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.